This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
Today on Leap Forward, we're joined by Rory Henson, a seasoned investment banker and key figure at IBIS Capital. Rory shares his journey from finance to shaping the edtech and media sectors, offering insights on AI's transformative role, geopolitical challenges, and the future of skills-based education. He highlights the power of community-driven growth and the importance of adaptability in today's fast-paced market. Ready to rethink the intersection of finance and innovation? I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Rory from IBIS to this edition of Leap Forward. Thank you, Rory, so much for coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me. Yeah.
It's really great to be able to sit down with you. Obviously, we've got a long-standing kind of relationship. I've got huge respect for you and for the business and everything that you do for the industry and the community. So yeah, look, why don't you kind of just introduce yourself a little bit and the business?
Yeah. Well, thanks, first of all, for the kind words. You don't hear that so often. So I guess very grateful for that. My background is, I started my career in sort of finance probably about 15 years ago. Started in the sales and trading floor, moved into investment banking because I like to kind of work with businesses more, and then moved into IBIS Capital to help build IBIS Capital at the time. And that was really with the mandate to grow the education coverage, I guess. And, my broader background, mixed race, half English, half Asian, and always probably had a sort of global international mindset, and IBIS felt like a good home for me at that time. And really, what's exciting about IBIS and probably the brainchild of Charles McIntyre is that it's an entrepreneurial firm that has a merchant banking model, primarily doing mergers and acquisitions and advisory services around that, but also innovating by either setting up companies or also investing on a deal-by-deal basis. And I've had the privilege to be involved in various different projects. I guess what really differentiates us is kind of our expertise in business models, particularly around media, technology, and business services, and then our deep sector knowledge and relationships across media, education, work, and healthcare. And it's the combination of expertise, I guess, around investment banking, operational experience as operators or board members, and then the investments, whether public or private, that I think kind of sets us out, um, which has been pretty interesting. Yeah.
And there are a few organizations, I think, that you can look to, I think, really, to be honest, around the world that have done, more than you guys, particularly, I think, in the UK and Europe, around really helping grow a sector. Tell us a little bit about kind of how you did that, or do that, I should say.
Initially, it started out with, writing some research to kind of pull together the facts. And to be honest, we probably spent a bit too much time doing that. So that's where it all started. And then, what also came apparent was nobody in the industry seemed to talk to each other. So, in truth, it wasn't as hard as it might have seemed, but um, perhaps I'm not giving us enough kudos, but we then just kind of went around and did the rounds with the various different stakeholders, whether they were investors who really didn't, especially in Europe, didn't really kind of think about this sector so much, through to the companies themselves, into government, into the larger existing incumbent corporates. I guess one of our missions has always been to super serve the community. So try to be as helpful as we can. So whilst we have our kind of core mandate of what we do as a finance firm, we've made countless introductions that have turned into people finding new executives or new board members or new members of the team. Connections that turn into partnerships, and we're um, I think it probably comes from the model of just being kind and being helpful.
And, how, sort of instrumental is it, do you think, that sort of, there is that facility slash layer that sort of kind of combines capital and community to driving these sorts of ecosystems?
Capital is a difficult one because there's levels of seniority within a firm, and trying to attract them into the community can sometimes be difficult. And so, you know, often at these events, it's difficult to get sort of higher, I guess, more senior individuals at the events. And we're quite fortunate that we're quite frequently having sort of managing partners and more senior people coming to the events. There's also the other risk is that you have sort of more associates who come, and to be honest, there's a lot of churn in kind of investment firms, and so trying to layer in capital into kind of community, I find can be quite difficult. And so that, if you call it sort of a market or introductory type thing, is still very much referral based. And that's where, ourselves, who have some brand, who've been in here for a long time and will continue to be here for a long time, can kind of help with that. But I do think, there are events or podcasts like this that help connect and create some visibility to who's the right people to go to, because it is this sort of matrix of relationships and skills that really make some partnerships special. And I guess that's what we're all looking for.
Let's kind of talk about context, I suppose. That'd be really good. I think, it's so here we are in June 2025. We've been through, periods of massive change and growth and challenges to that kind of growth. Give me a kind of bit of a scene set. Where are we kind of today, would you say, as a market? Give me some of the kind of the big kind of perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've just hosted our EdTechX Summit, and Charles and I gave a keynote. And the sort of broad theme of that was, we're in this world of chaos at the moment, where there's, huge uncertainty because of geopolitical fragmentation, polarization, populism, information warfare, and, gaps in governance where we have misalignment of incentives across all stakeholders. So, we're in this, sort of washing machine of activity, and thrown into that is also kind of this concept of artificial intelligence, which has been along for a long time. Um, but, I think in 2023, that turned from theory into experimentation. And now in 24, I mean, in 2024, there was sort of 20 large language models, language models launched similar to ChatGPT. And in 2025, people have moved from just kind of generating ideas and editing text to um, finding their purpose and things like that. So we're in a moment of change, and some of that is really structural. I sit on the board of a company called ACC, which provides services into the international education sector, and the sort of immigration policies, etc., have some structural impacts into that industry, which are unlikely to change over the sort of, let's say, short term of 2 to 3 years, um, but is still a high demand, high recurring industry. And so you need to think about, we think about that at the board meetings that we have.
And how is that climate sort of affecting investment and growth for those businesses as well?
Yeah, I'd say sort of going back to the beginning of 2013, where lots of innovation was happening in education. There's hundreds of companies being kind of set up then. By the time we got to 2018, 2019 was really the exciting kind of what I call the making heydays of edtech. And then, that was supercharged by the pandemic, which was, a world experiment on online education in effect. And, if you speak to investors, particularly limited partners and asset managers, if you weren't looking for kind of realizing investments at that point, you know, looking back in hindsight today, there's a lot of questions asked as to why didn't you do that? Because what then followed was this sort of what I call a sort of fizzle and a pop of, performance led by cost of living crisis and other sort of challenges, which really had an impact on growth, bringing down valuations and turning the market into to some degree, more of a market of consolidation and looking how to more defensive acquisitions, all the way through to restructuring and liquidation. So where we are today, I mean, as a firm, as IBIS, we're quite fortunate. We've been quite busy through the last kind of 12 to 18 months. So we've been, helping our clients on those types of things. We were able to make exits in 2023, which was good for us. And I think going forward there will be kind of more activity, um, and all the you know, there's businesses that are impacted by regulatory, which is causing kind of turbulence at the moment. But there are sort of areas around certification or skills that are kind of real hotspots now for investment.
I was sort of going to sort of talk more about, I suppose, the kind of looking forward, I suppose, and both the kind of existing kind of relationships you have, the portfolios that you have, investments that you've made, but also future kind of like what are the things that you're kind of what are you advising your portfolio companies? What are you looking for from a kind of from a future kind of investment perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, to some degree, we've exited our investments.
Yeah,
We're on the other side looking for new investments
yeah,
now, and we've pursued a couple, and that's exciting times. I think um, we're still involved in a couple of companies, as I mentioned, ACC Global, which is an Australian-based business, and Charles is involved in eTeacher Group, which is based in Israel, and really the I guess kind of simple summary of our advice, or at least mine, is
yeah,
around kind of focus, probably a bit more conservative growth approach, ensuring that you're kind of cash generative and and kind of doubling down on kind of your strengths. So, ACC, for example, is in 22 on a sort of a private commercial report was ranked as the one of the businesses that had the best brand in terms of its students and customers in that way, and trying to focus on more of a customer centric approach, um, whilst also moving with the times of looking at how workflows can improve, particularly with AI. And some of the experimentation we've had has been good, some of it's been questionable, but I think you have to go out and try to employ this model of Kaizen. I don't know if
right,
you know that
yeah.
Japanese.
Tell for those that don't, explain.
So I don't know. I first heard this word when I was, I think, I don't know, in year 12 doing my A
Yeah,
levels business school, and business studies. And I guess it's this concept of constant refinement and continuous improvement. And it's sort of, I guess, I guess in the investment world, the idea of continuous improvement or continuous returns of compounding has, significant gains over the long term. And so that's that for me. Yeah.
love it. Here we are in the UK, obviously, and it's been been obviously a great sort of hotbed, and still in some ways, from an investment and growth perspective, there's still a lot of exciting stuff going on here. But what kind of markets are you particularly kind of interested in at the moment?
Yeah, so our M&A business is really a global operation. So we have a partner based in Boston, the US. We have clients. I've had clients all around North, South Americas, Europe, Asia Pac, and those are consistent features. As a sector expert, we kind of get drawn to lots of places, and as somebody who's been in the industry for well over 10 years, we've had the experience of projects right across geographies and different models. I'd say from an investment perspective, I think we're more focused on where our networks are richest and where we can add the most value. As a deal by deal investor, we don't need to deploy capital. So when we're really interested in something, it's because we have very good reasons to kind of chase it. Even within the sector, we have strengths that are particular. We looked at something in the online medical education space very recently, which didn't happen, but we were very excited about. But I'd say so. UK, Ireland, just in geography terms, UK, Ireland, kind of rest of Europe, and then I guess you might have that Commonwealth corridor, but really it's more about kind of a product that can be global,
Mhm.
and you know. I guess consistent with what we're saying on kind of our boards is we're being more conservative. So looking at kind of businesses that are probably more B2B in nature or have some defensibility to kind of what they do.
What are the biggest challenges around kind of growth at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you know, to some degree, shrinking markets.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's, um, and that's applicable across, um, y- different sectors within the industry. I'd say also uncertainty with regulations and how that's going to impact
Hmm.
businesses.
Give me some examples on the regulatory stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, for example, I guess if you're a business that has a U.S. exposure and tariffs are being
Yeah.
introduced, how does that impact your supply chain, or how does that impact your sort of core business? Or if you're in K-12 and you're, a private school operator and you have VAT coming in, how is that going to impact
Yeah.
your customers? So it's those types of of things, and I guess in the example of international ed. Um, where the major four countries of the US, UK, Australia, Canada, who are putting caps on students coming in, then there's a shift from, those countries who take in 40% of international students versus uh, newer, the 60%, which is driven by, the rest of the world. But now there's new opportunities to expand into places like Germany, into the Nordics, or into Ireland, where there's a competitive battleground going on at the moment for capturing, those flows.
Yeah, really interesting. And talking of shifts, obviously kind of, I suppose in, thinking of, kind of the wider kind of education, learning and sort of skills sector, there's obviously been a bit of a shift there in terms of really looking at the workplace, and looking at that kind of that bridge between education and vocation. Kind of tell me a little bit about kind of like, from your perspective, how you see that.
I've always been a big fan of higher education. I think there's so much value that an individual gets, and not just an individual as a student, but also, through sort of research and what that does for companies and also nations. I think it's a real competitive lever that countries appropriately use. I do think the world has shifted to saying that maybe degrees are not specific enough.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if I'm going to sit on the fence here, but I'm still a big fan of degrees. I think there's a level of skills that you can learn, but trying to discover yourself through creativity and being challenged is a really important part of education and pedagogy. I think, having said that, higher education is under threat. We know that. We've seen the sort of news articles of, mass restructurings and, the sentiment of government supporting it less um, than otherwise. And Sebastian Thrun's bold statement of there will only be 50 universities
Mhm.
in 50 years' time is starting to feel a little bit more possible, maybe in the traditional sense of what we think of end-to-end university means. And now the focus is on kind of what skills do you have? And some of that is vocational. So give me hard skills of license to practice and continued professional development, or specializations that take you from, a nurse through to being able to do dermatology, or, different sort of
Mhm.
kind of skills. And, those are great. And I think um, what I'd also say is that with the introduction of AI, what we're starting to notice with people is that the sort of more junior, say, professionals' skills are being more automated,
Mhm.
and the sort of on ramp of new people going, entering industries, kind of starting to um, I just have a question around how do you build those skills in principle, um, and I think through kind of certifications you can do that, but not everyone goes on a vocational path. And
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because like on one side, you've got sort of this big headline of, AI and automation kind of taking our jobs, and then you just jump onto Chat GPT and write a prompt about, you know list out the kind of critical skills gaps that exist in the world, and the figure comes back in the hundreds of thousands and millions across the planet. Kind of tell me a little bit about kind of like where you again, it's talking about sitting on the fence or not, but where do you sit kind of on this kind of view of kind of what the critical kind of skills gaps are that exist, and how do we address that?
Yeah. I mean, just talk about kind of people scared of losing their jobs. I think, something like 80 million new jobs is expected to be created through the introduction of AI. And Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, was sort of saying, well, all jobs will be affected. You just need to learn some new skills. And that 80 million is actually a net surplus for all the jobs it may replace. So how people have probably practically started to do this is they try to do skill assessments, particularly within corporates,
Yeah.
and try to identify what skills that you're missing. Because a license to practice and sort of more kind of defined pathway, I mean, that's kind of that's kind of there. I think what's more difficult is how what skills do we need, and then if you can kind of get to well, we need more um, strategic thinking. That can be quite a difficult skill to teach, and not necessarily online education is the best modality. Sometimes workshops and or even, sometimes more, you know, um, culture-based events might be more relevant, or you need sort of platforms like Peakon who do 360-degree analytics. I read a book which somehow we've then applied in a workshop later at IBIS, which um, was a book called Surrounded by Idiots, and is trying to do a sort of more simple Myers-Briggs of identifying personality types that um, kind of come together. So I think, um, and this may be me being maybe ignorant, but I haven't seen anything that is very good at identifying kind of what those skills are
Hmm.
in a good way. I've definitely seen it perhaps more at a board level,
Hmm.
but then the sort of matrix is so much more nuanced than at a large corporate, and that's my kind of rough take at the moment. I'm
Hmm.
sure we'll get there,
Hmm.
um, but at the moment I'm not seeing anything that's kind of challenging, at least my thoughts of what how to address that skill gap.
Yeah, interesting. And you just talked about reading a book. How do you yourself learn new skills? How do you kind of continue your lifelong learning journey?
It's a good question. I think I try as many modalities as
Yeah.
possible. I guess from a personal development perspective, I kind of just thrown myself into a lot of physical, sport-based, active stuff, which has really helped with things like resilience or breaking boundaries of what you think you can
Yeah.
achieve. And this might sound a bit spiritual, but I really believe in kind of um, the sort of physical and sort of mental capacity being able to, if you can improve one, then you can improve the other, and you just kind of balance that over time. That's kind of more, and I think as I've got older, I think those types of things actually become more important. Um, but obviously, then there's the more traditional ways of going to conferences, reading books,
Yeah.
kind of reading. I kind of read the Economist. I have different friends groups um, who are always challenging me with different investment ideas, and really. What excites me is the diversity of kind of ideas that I get around, that I have around me, and then, I also I do enjoy the odd podcast. The one I sometimes tap into is the All in One, the
Okay.
All In podcast, where there's those sort of four billionaire Americans who just sort of sit for an hour each week and just, chat on the market. And it's phenomenal. I forget his name. Is it David Sachs? Who's also become part of this Doge, you know, operation in the US, which I mean, it's just phenomenal to watch and listen.
It's so true. I find podcasts today to be almost mini MBA like, right? It's just it doesn't matter whether you're on the move or in the car or whatever it is, dropping the kids off at school, whatever it is. But to have that, there's so much quality kind of in these sort of as a modality. I think is a lot to be said. Obviously, this podcast is obviously an exception to that rule. But what about sort of pace and sort of agility? How do you sort of maintain that? I mean, obviously, you talked about your sort of mental, kind of resilience and strength there. But sort of, how do you think about sort of, maintaining pace and speed while still kind of keeping the quality and excellence up?
Yeah, look, I think quality is the key word there, and is I guess trying to be good at recognizing your and your team's ability to deliver quality. Um, I do think um, I won't go into it, but the last sort of 12 to something months has been quite a challenging time for me with lots of things going on, whether it's personal or, surgical or,
Right.
uh, business related items. And it's, it has been difficult to navigate that. But I think it's just trying to create perspective and kind of crack on with it and having a bit of, um, good people around you as well, where you can if you aren't solving something, that's not a good thing, especially if there's a sort of problem there. So I think being able to, I guess, face your fear and actually kind of address it is a good way. But kind of that's taking it from a more challenging time. I think when times are kind of more humming, which is the word I love to use, was like is when, you have fun, excitement, challenge, empowerment, rewards, all these types of things excites people. And, I think we spend a lot of time at IBIS trying to think about how do we create that environment, building a joint culture, spending time, which is, you know, for, trying to build each other up when, we all have our different weaknesses, all have our different strengths, and trying to sort of help people keep moving in the direction they want to go is the emphasis.
I want to know about how you define and measure success, right? And you can talk about, portfolio companies, or you can talk about yourself, you can talk about the business, but like, what are the kind of the real metrics that matter to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that's really important, which is hard to measure, is just people,
Hmm.
and that point of are they gelling well? Are they all pushing in the same direction? So this kind of concept of alignment, it's much easier um, to paddle downstream than it is upstream, and so if and having the if it's four people in a kayak, then everybody doing the same thing is much easier, right? So I think that's the sort of and how to measure that is often quite difficult. Um, but then obviously there's the sort of financial KPIs that for me really are three areas. It's around revenue growth, kind of margin and margin optimization, and then risk. Risk and quality of revenue. I guess risk or if we take on something, is it going to steer the ship in a slightly different direction? Is it going to take more resources? It's really attractive to do that, but is it going to do, what happens in a year's time?
How do you, on that last one, how do you measure that?
It's difficult, but I guess giving an example of a conversation I was having recently with somebody who had a generally a software business that had recurring like license based revenue, where they're going to take on a project based element that was double, it would
Right.
double their business overnight. It was in the Middle East, as we've just been talking about, and it would be a great thing, but they'd have to build content, build resources around that. And is that the right thing to do?
Right.
Um, and I think it might be, but you should definitely challenge the assumption and go kind of think about it. I think the other KPI, which I'm a huge fan of, um, is just around referrals. I think referrals for me is an ultimate uh, kind of KPI for quality service, etc. And what I say to all something I adopted myself after it happened to me with my first client, but then I also tell all my team that this is really what you should be doing, which is in the M&A business, if your client's not trying to hire you, then, or if, that's the goal you want, is that at the end of the project, somebody's trying to hire you. And and that for me has always been, I've had the fortune of having that quote a few times. But I think it's a sort of level of ambition that people should target. And, that's a little bit conflicting with my own interest, or the IBIS's interest. But I think it's important.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to steal that one. Yeah. I bet you've got really great sort of kind of anti kind of sort of clauses in your contracts on the basis of that metric, and that, I suppose that comes back down to the sort of the point you're making around sort of the people, and sort of, what do you look for, I suppose, in a sense, in terms of whether it's investing in teams or, your own teams? How do you kind of really think about sort of that sort of high performance kind of culture that you're looking to kind of invest or be part of?
Yeah, look, I think it all starts with culture. Um, in our last strategy day, I used the example of Formula One, and Formula One actually has a huge team. I guess everybody's been watching Drive to Survive on Netflix, but they have a really huge team. And I was reading an article which said, your team is only as strong as the weakest link, and that was in reference to the Formula One, and I think that's actually somewhat true. So really it starts at culture. So for us, it's things like integrity, passion, pursuit of quality, competitiveness, kind of more of a nurturing mentorship kind of style. Um, and I guess particularly, I guess looking at the alignment in the vision,
Yeah.
is your vision the same as the vision of the firm? Um, at a small place like IBIS, there's not a lot of moving pieces there. So if it is, then that's a great thing. Create empowerment, provide rewards, and as I say, have fun at the same time. So we recently completed a project, and the debate of what we should do was between should we do Sail GP in Portsmouth in July, which is like the Formula One, but for boats, or Formula E, and we're taking the team out to go to Formula E, and celebrating all the success of things that were sort of done. So that's yeah.
Two brilliant examples, I suppose, as well. To your point around teamwork and everything else. Um, so fast forward, 2030 beyond of this, you've got sort of, really strong kind of investment thesis that probably, sort of underpins kind of what you're doing. Give me a sense of kind of what you think the real critical kind of trends are that are going to shape the next kind of 3 to 5 years, and how are you preparing for them?
I think politically, keeping an eye on what's happening is really important, because I think there's been change recently, and that's not going to um, uh, reverse anytime soon. So, the sort of the way of the world we need to accept is going to be like this for, let's say, a decade
Mhm.
at its very least. So, looking at um, key factors there that might impact your business or impact your investments. I ran an experiment recently to see what my team or the team in IBIS would say. Um, if you put the experiment of if you were hiring somebody and you had to make a decision on the following facts, um, would you? And there were two candidates that came out completely identical and even. But the only difference was one had a smartphone and the other didn't. And as you can imagine, everybody came out with a resounding result of 100% saying that they would hire the person with a smartphone, because they, adopted the new innovation. I think that's going to be the same for artificial intelligence, and it's
Mhm.
not quite here today because people don't trust it. But even the use cases that I employ can see the sort of power of how it can adapt how you can adapt and evolve with it. And I think those who aren't in the sort of freeze mode of like looking at it,
Yeah.
who are actually using it, are actually starting to get ahead already. The pace of change is really quick. And then I think more, I guess, strategically for our investment kind of thoughts is around, with all these gaps in alignment, how can we reset the clock for founders or execs going forward? And that's where I'm particularly excited about whether there are companies that are sitting within large corporate structures that are simply not getting the attention and resources that they could use, or are there, there's been a very tiring time for founders who I'm sure have been working over the last 5 years pretty hard, and the sort of stresses of that, and helping them maybe realize kind of the future with the management teams or other types of things. So for us, I think that's an area that's exciting and will continue to be exciting.
And going back to the Rory that first kind of entered this industry, I suppose, in a sense, what advice would you give to him coming in today?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, that was a long time ago. And I have to say I was probably quite a different person. Or maybe I was still quite similar, but I'd say probably be brave, be bold, and just be yourself. Um, would be sort of simple kind of advice. But I think it does come back to um, finding that alignment and creating an environment that makes you the best you can be. To work smart, working hard is not always working smart, and that concept of kaizen, continuously improving, and then surround yourself with the best people. And best people is not just smart, etc. Be as diverse as you can be. Challenge your thinking. Be creative in that process. And I think those three things, at least I've learned and would tell my previous self.
Love it. Okay, well, look, I'm going to ask you some really rapid fire kind of questions now because I want to just kind of inject a bit of like Rory kind of instantaneous kind of gratification here. So, if you could instantly download kind of any skill into your brain as per kind of Keanu in the Matrix, what would it be?
Languages, and not just languages, but everything from learning the religions or cultural aspects of the people.
Love it. Any particular languages or religions?
All of them.
Love it. Okay. Dream passenger, living or dead, that you'd share the ride with?
My best friend, and we do this a lot on cars, trains, and planes. We race a lot together, so he's just got good yellow energy. If you read the book, yeah, I mentioned
What's the one piece of tech from sci-fi that you wished existed today?
medical labs that could heal you instantly.
Like that one.
Partially for myself because I've been through injuries, but also
Right.
because to reduce the suffering and help bring up simple things that shouldn't really prevent people from doing what they want to do.
Teleportation becomes real. Where's the first place you go and what do you take with you?
Something somewhere dramatic. So, the mountains, bottom of the ocean, the moon, something like that. And what would I bring? Just clothes.
That's a useful, a
Yeah.
useful, a useful. Okay. Ultimate driving song.
I don't drive in London,
Okay.
so I'd have to
Walking, riding. Yeah.
walking right. But
Or do you like to listen to kind of the hubbub of life?
since we're on driving, when I lived in Portugal, I used to listen to whatever that song was that goes like "One kiss is all it takes," whatever that is. Used to pump me up. Yeah.
Love it. Okay, and last one. If you had your pick of any Marvel superpower, what would it be?
So I like the Hulk. It's just something about going green,
I can
getting
see that in
passionate,
you,
and
actually. Yeah.
making things happen. That's yeah. Don't know why. Yeah.
Okay, Hulk, listen, thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant having you on Leap Forward.
Yeah. No, appreciate your time. Thanks, Justin.